Hi there. This lesson is going to take a whole bunch of stuff that we just did in the previous lesson, kind of like we always do with math, and we're going to add a little something to it, and then we're going to change something. So I hope it doesn't blow your mind too much, but actually I'm going to show you a very powerful idea that you're going to carry with you into higher math and into science class. So hang with me for a little bit. This is going to be a relatively short video. As soon as I feel like I've explained the whole idea of independent and dependent variables, I'm going to go ahead and let you try the exercises for this lesson. And then in the next lesson, we're going to talk more and more about how to actually use this concept. So here we go. Let's talk about something we've already done, okay? In the previous lesson, there was a video, actually I think in all three of the videos, I was talking about how, what if somebody told you they have a mystery number that you don't know, and then they did some stuff to it and told you what the result is. And we found out that we could use three different methods, either the balance or backtracking, or even more importantly, inverse operations to find the value of that mystery number. But, there's always a but, right? But what if I told you that there's a mystery number here that is being multiplied by 2, but you also don't know the result? So I have two different unknowns here, the mystery number and its result if it's multiplied by 2. Okay, well, how are you supposed to find the mystery number? Here's the bad news. You can't, okay? You can't find the mystery number. Even if I had a number in my head for what x was and I only gave you this to work with, you would have to be extraordinarily lucky to guess my number. Here's the good news though. X can be literally any number in the known universe that we have come up with. It could be anything, okay? Infinite number of possibilities for what x could be. So if that's the case, then isn't it true that y could also be infinitely many possible numbers? Well, that's too much to work with, and I'm not a lucky person. I've never won a scratcher. I think I've only won one game of bingo in my entire life, so I'm not going to rely on luck. What I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out a different way to use this tool, to use this setup. I'm not really looking for mystery number anymore. What I really want to know is, what can I do with this variable to figure out the value of this variable? There's a very important difference I want you to see about these two sides of the equal sign, and that is that y is kind of just hanging out by itself. Nothing's happening with y. It's just sitting there waiting. What is it waiting for? It's waiting to see what happens to x. Because x right now is kind of in the middle of the action. Something's happening to x. What is it? It's being multiplied by 2, right? So, since y is kind of just sitting here patiently waiting, and x is going to be actively multiplied by 2, that means that I can choose what x is, okay? It also means that y, the value of y, depends on the value of x, okay? There's a special little name for y. Since it's all by itself and it's just kind of sitting there waiting to see what happens, its value depends on x. And since it depends on x, we call it the dependent variable. And that's because we can't do anything with it yet. All of the stuff that we're gonna do is here. Now, if this one is the dependent variable, what does that make x? It doesn't depend on y. Why doesn't x depend on y? Because nothing's happening with y, okay? X isn't just hanging around waiting for y to be something. X is actually involved in some calculations. it's being multiplied by 2. I'm going to go ahead and name x, and then we'll talk more about what it means. X is the independent variable. And there's two very important things you need to know about the independent variable. Okay? Here's the first one. Make sure you jot some of these two things down in your notes. You can rephrase them however you want. The first thing is x doesn't depend on y. It's independent. Okay? If an independent person is hanging around and says, hey, I'm independent, that means they don't depend on other people to do the things they want to do. Okay? You are probably a dependent, at least in your basic life. You're probably a dependent, okay? You do depend on other people, namely your parents or guardians, to house you, feed you, clothe you, maybe not pick out your clothes, but they're the ones that are gonna pay for them, right? So you do depend on other people to live your life. I don't live with my mom anymore, okay? I do have a family and that changes things, but let's keep it simple. I provide my own housing, I provide my own food, and I provide the money to buy my clothes. That makes me an independent person, okay? Now, the second thing about being an independent variable is that the person who's actually working on this gets to choose the value. You get to choose what x is going to be worth, okay? You don't really get to choose y because y is just kind of sitting there hanging out. I mean, you could, but in terms of the concept we're trying to get across here, you choose the independent variable, and whatever the result is that happens on this side where all the action's happening, that will then give you the answer or the value of y. That's why y depends on x, okay? So the first thing about an independent variable is that it doesn't depend on the other side. It doesn't depend on what's happening over here. X is independent. The second thing is we get to choose what x is. Another name sometimes used, especially in science, for independent variable is manipulated variable. It's the one that we get to manipulate. We get to change it. We get to fill it in. We get to say what it's worth. Dependent, sometimes science classes will call it the responding variable because its value is respondent to what we decide x is, okay? So let's try that. If I get to choose what x is from an entire universe of numbers, negative or positive, we're gonna pick an easy one. Let's pick 2. I decided that x is now worth 2. Okay? Why? I don't know, because I wanted to. So my question then is, if x is 2, then what's y? Because the value of y depends on what happens right here. And if I multiply 2 times 2, this statement right here tells me that y's value is 4. And y only gets a value once I'm finished messing around with x. Okay? With me so far? What if I said, yeah, I want this to be 0? Does y still get to be 4? Nope. Y has to change depending on what happens with x. Right? 2 times 0 is 0. I could pick any number. Any number that I change x to is going to result in a change in y, okay? Let's think about a real life example here. I'm gonna come up with 2 variables in a scenario. I have a car that I like to drive sometimes I have to, and I have to put gas in that car, right? In order for it to go forward. In order for me to go any distance, I've got to make sure I have some gas, right? So I have 2 things here. I have my car going a distance, and I have the amount of gas in my car. Those are 2 variables, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and put M for miles that I can drive. And I'm gonna use G for gallons of gas. And I also know, thanks to the owner's manual in my car, that it averages about 25 miles per gallon. Now I have a lot of information on the board right now. Let's make sure we know what it all means. First of all, I have a unit rate right here. Remember those? This is a unit rate that says generally, or on average, my car will drive 25 miles for every gallon of gas that's in the tank. Okay? This is nothing new to us because we've played around with unit rates. I know it may have been a while, but we should be okay with what that means. And then I have two variables. I have miles, the amount of miles I can drive in my car, and I have G, the amount of gas that's in my car. Now here's my question to you, and I'm going to give you some time to think about it. Which one of these is the dependent variable? In other words, which one of those depends on what happens with the other one? And which one is the independent variable? In other words, which one not only doesn't depend on the other one, but which is the one that I get to change? Think about that for a second. If you need to, and I would appreciate it, pause the video and think about the question I just asked. Which one depends on the other, and which one doesn't, but also that I get to change? Let's start with miles, okay? Do I get to choose, do I, the driver, get to choose how far my car goes with any amount of gas? Do I get to change the mileage that my car gets? That would take some serious engineering, and I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to get into my car and tweak things around to change how far I can go on 1 gallon of gas. So this is not something I can change. And I also want you to ask this question. Does the number of miles that I get to drive depend on how much gas is in the tank? If I don't put any gas in my tank, do I get to go anywhere? No. Which one did I choose? I choose how much gas is in my car. That's the only one I get to really choose, okay? So since I get to choose how much gas is in my car, that makes this the independent variable, right? And how far I get to drive totally depends on how much gas is in my car. If I put no gas and I'm on E, I don't go anywhere. If I decide to put the pump in the tank and fill it all the way up, I get to drive much further. Does that make sense? So this one is dependent. Now, just a little side note here. You saw how long it took me to write independent variable and dependent variable. Sometimes you're going to see me use the abbreviations for those, the initials. So every once in a while, I'm going to write independent variable as IV. Okay, that's what that means, independent variable. Sometimes I'll call this the DV. Okay, just so you don't get confused. So now, let's see if we can figure out an equation for this. I know which variable's which now, and I know what my rate is. I know that to figure out how far I get to drive, I'm basically gonna have to figure out, okay, so if I have this many gallons, how far do I get to go? Well, I'm gonna have to take this number and multiply it by how many gallons I have to figure out how many miles, right? That shouldn't be too new of a concept to us because we've played around with writing equations. So let me write this out. I know that gallons of gas is my independent variable, and that's the one that sees all the action with the math. So I'm going to take 25 and say, okay, if I multiply 25 times the amount of gas that I put in my car, that will tell me how many miles I get to go. Okay? Does that look good? Does that make sense? the number of miles I get to drive is the same as me calculating 25 miles per gallon times the number of times the gas that I have in there. Okay? And that'll tell me how many miles I can go. This works, but you're not going to see it written this way very much. Okay? You're actually going to see it written much more often backwards, and I'll tell you why in a second. Let me go ahead and write this. The miles that I drive equals 25 miles per gallon. Okay? Why is it written like this? Well, I can't really say there's a reason for it, except that it makes it easier to see. Okay? We usually put the dependent variable first because whatever happens over here is going to end up with a nice clean number here for this variable. Let's play with this. If, and I'm just going to hold on to this one for now, so I'm going to rewrite it. You don't have to if you have room. Let me rewrite that equation. Okay, so how many miles I get to drive depends on how many gallons of gas I put. What if I put 2 gallons? What if I have $5 in my pocket and I just want to get 2 gallons? Okay, I'm going to rewrite this whoops. But without the G, instead of the G, I'm actually going to open that up and say, I'm putting 2 gallons in there. Okay? Now all of the action is happening here. M is just kind of hanging out waiting. Okay, whenever you're done, tell me how far we can go. And once we do the calculations, we get a value for M. 25 times 2 is 50. Okay? So the value of M is 50. I think the whole reason that people really like to put the dependent variable first is that when you're done with all the math, when you're done going through everything, it leaves you with a nice clean statement that says M equals this. Okay? If we did it the original way we had it and the way that we've been doing it in the previous lessons, it would be backwards and it would say 50 is the number of miles, which isn't bad, but I think conventionally, and you're going to see it this way the most, this just makes it easier to read. Okay? Excuse me. So I have values for both variables now. I get to choose how many gallons of gas I put, right? Once I'm done doing all the calculations, the value of M comes out. M totally depends on how much G is. Okay? So, quick review. Independent variable is the one you get to choose, and it can be any number in the world. Any number. It's the manipulated variable. It's the one that you get to change. The dependent variable is the one that's kind of just hanging out over here, watching all the math action happening, and once all the math action is finished, it finally knows its value. All right? Dependent variable, you don't necessarily get to change, but you do get to say, oh, there's the answer. Independent variable is the one you get to change. And the other thing that you need to know about the independent variable is that it's usually the one happening, or it almost always is the one where all of the other stuff is happening. In this case, I know that I get 25 miles for 1 gallon, so 25 times G gives me the number of miles I get to go, M. Are you tired of me talking about this yet? I'm just trying to make sure it sticks. But here's a better way. Go ahead and check out the exercises underneath this video. You're going to see a little bit of both. First thing I'm going to ask you to do in the try it section is look at the 2 variables that I'm giving you and you see if you can label them independent or dependent. In the problem solving section underneath that, I want to see if you not only can pick out which is which, but can you also make an equation out of it. I'm not going to ask you to like fill in the independent variable and find out the value of the dependent variable. I just want to see how good you are or how well you're coming along with setting up equations. Okay? Don't worry though, we're going to get plenty of practice. And I'm going to see you in the exercise review video as soon as you're done. Click on it. Well, you don't have to do it as soon as you're done, but click on the exercise video to meet me back here and let's go over those. All right?